So I am very pleased to be talking with Colleen Jantzen today. Hi, Colleen.
Hello.
So nice to have you. And of course, we're talking about the new InScribe anthology that's coming out called Creativity and Chaos, Artistic Endeavors for Trying Times. Very excited about the release of that coming in the fall. And you have a poem in that anthology.
I do.
That is exciting. Actually, so your poem, I'm just trying to find it here, is called Orphan.
It
Hmm.
is called Orphan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us just a little bit about what inspired you to write that and
Sure.
fits with the anthology? And then maybe I'll get you to read it a little bit
You
later.
might have to figure out how it fits with the anthology. I don't know if I could do that, but I can tell you what I wrote.
Okay.
I can, probably to do with trying times. So I think I wrote this poem uh, really on the heels of finding myself in a social situation. I was in a conversation trying to connect with a new group of people. Um, Particularly a new group of Christians, because as lots of people have experienced, uh, different people, especially during the pandemic, when they felt very at home in their home church for like many years, their whole life possibly, and then as the chaos of the pandemic started impacting church, it started impacting relationships, and some of those relationships became sort of not sort of comfortable, safe spaces anymore.
Mhm.
And so has been my experience, and so it's very painful. And I find myself now within this new Christian context, trying to fit in, and I found myself weirdly sort of relating stories, relating other people's stories, just so that I could join the conversation. Just
Oh,
regular social stuff, but they don't know me. I don't have a lot of history, but I'm trying to make these points of connection so that I can feel like I belong somewhere again.
yeah.
And and then I got home and I thought, why did you do that? That was so weird. Like usually you have a lot just to talk about out of your own life, but I just couldn't find anything to connect with. And so I was telling another story that I heard from somebody else
Yeah.
as a way to join. And it just really kind of brought home this sort of feeling of orphanness and abandoned and rejection that a lot of people have experienced, and is particularly in the last couple of years, and how we long for connection
Yeah.
and sort of the lengths that we'll go to sometimes to kind of create that place of connection. So that's
Mhm.
sort of the story behind the poem.
Well, just to interject, I think it fits perfectly because a lot of the anthology itself, I think the theme for it anyways, kind of sprang out of the pandemic and the
Mm,
feelings that so many people were having
yeah,
of sort of chaos and displacement and those things.
yeah,
Um, and then the fact that sometimes creativity, well, certainly everybody was, being creative, baking and sewing and
yeah.
doing all those things, right, to fill that void. But that creativity is a really powerful way of dealing with one's, sense of displacement or whatever. And I think
Mhm.
I'm assuming that writing poems, is one of those creative endeavors that helps in
Yeah,
that regard.
it is. Yeah, yeah. It's often feels a little bit like giving birth, and then I can kind of yeah, then gets released, and then it helps me, and I hope, obviously my hope is that it helps other people make sense of the their world and maybe the suffering that they're experiencing.
Absolutely,
Mhm.
absolutely. And I admire poets because poets can say and somehow drill into those deep emotional connections, in a way that's just really targeted and hits the nail on the head, as opposed to, people who write prose like me, who have
Mhm.
to be a lot more verbose. So I do admire poets for sure. So would you like to read your poem for us?
Sure, sure. Orphan. I'm longing for connection. Are you? To feel like I belong, really, to a place, a space, a people. This fractured world has fractured me, and I repeat stories, not my own, trying to feel at home, to tie a tie, however tenuous, to someone, anyone who will own me.
Wow. Well, that poem is lovely, and I can sense the emotion not only in the way you read it, but just that deep sense of sort of longing and disconnect, I guess you could say.
Mm.
And and I think it was a very true experience for a lot of people, even in the Christian community, or perhaps even more so in some ways, because there did become sort of this divide, even, ideologically, things that weren't necessarily eternal, but that are important to people, that divided them. And it's left lasting scars, I
It
think.
has. Yeah, it has. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So are you a poet? Would you consider yourself a poet, or do you
I
other?
would, although, I mean, prose, I probably would say I write more prose just because it doesn't typically follow, rhyme or meter necessarily.
Right.
But that's my favorite genre to write in. I would say that, and just writing letters to people. I do love to write a letter.
Lovely. That's wonderful.
Yeah,
And I think it's kind of a lost art
yeah,
form.
yeah.
Um,
By hand, yeah, on this, like paper like this.
yes. Yeah. And it's always so nice when a person gets
Yeah,
something like that
yeah,
in the mail.
yeah.
You know that somebody actually took the time to consider, they were
Mhm.
actually really thinking of you, not just
Yeah,
shooting off a quick
yeah, yeah.
text or social media thing.
Have written essays, and I do a fair bit of speaking, and so I write to speak. But that's in terms of like creative writing, I would say prose is it. Yeah.
Okay. So tell me a little bit more about that. Like you do speaking. And so like where at?
Sure. So years ago when my hair was still naturally brown, I used to do a lot of speaking for women's events,
Uh-huh.
that's a sort of a typical women's event in a church.
Yeah.
And more recently, I've started doing some preaching, and I've been preaching a little bit in a small Lutheran church here in our community, which has
Nice.
been super fun. And then I also just recently took some more training to become a life celebrant. And so I've sort of prepare services for families that maybe aren't connected to a community or not connected to a church, but still want to have some way to honor their family whose member who's passed away. So just some speaking around that. And I have to say, in terms of a creative writing exercise,
Yeah.
I'm really enjoying that, trying to sort of hear somebody's story and figure out how to bring comfort in there in a context that's going to work for them. So yeah, it's been good.
Find that really fascinating because you mentioned, when you talked about the inspiration for the poem, and then even in the
Mhm.
poem, you were saying, always telling other people's stories, but
Yeah,
maybe that's a God-given gift,
yeah, yeah. We'll see. Yeah, we'll see. I sure enjoy the work. I like to come along people, when they're suffering, and just and I've always sort of, in terms of a Christian calling, I've always loved anytime I can be a pastor to somebody who has no pastor.
Yeah.
That's really my sweet spot. So
Oh,
yeah,
beautiful. And that is really wonderful. And I love to hear that because it is something different. I haven't actually
Mhm.
heard anyone talk about it that way,
Yeah.
especially the celebration of life
Mhm.
at end of things. Often people are very resistant to doing that because
Mhm.
it's so emotional. It can be
Yeah,
draining. It can be
yeah, yeah.
difficult.
It is draining.
Yeah, yeah. But
But it's great.
obviously,
But it's lovely, lovely,
yes,
lovely
obviously
work.
we
Yeah,
need people who are
yeah,
passionate about it and
yeah,
and have a call in that way.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that's really wonderful.
yeah.
Um, so when you said you write essays and you do write poems in that too, have you shared those with anybody? Like have you had anything published or anything like
Not a lot. So I have one essay published in a book. It's back there actually. I can't even remember what the name of the book is, but it was a book. One of my profs, when I was doing my Master's of Christian Studies, put together a collection of essays just reflecting on the church and sort of where we are, and kind of not being critical for critical sake, but just taking a critical look at some of our practices and then,
Yeah.
and are they helpful or hurtful or whatever. So just a really interesting group of people got together to contribute essays to this, and he invited me to do that. So that was really an honor and a fun process. And then a little bit in an online or a literary journal that the University, Ambrose University puts out, their
Okay.
English department.
Yeah.
And then you guys, and I don't know if there's anything else. I'm extremely prolific, but I really struggle to figure out how to get things um, out there.
As an organization in Canada, anyways, InScribe is very good at that. Like the
Yeah,
encouragement. I think the
yeah,
encouragement piece is probably our biggest strength.
mhm, yeah, yeah,
So, you know,
yeah,
and that also kind of speaks to your piece. It's like finding
mhm,
a community, you know, of like-minded people, because
yeah,
you know, we don't focus on differences in terms of our doctrinal
yeah,
differences or things like
yeah,
that, right? Or even genre.
mhm,
Like
yeah,
we have journalists who write for newspapers. We have, you
right.
know, radio announcers. We have novelists. You know, sort of the
Mhm,
whole gamut. But we're more interested in supporting one another
yeah,
on that
yeah,
base
yeah,
level.
yeah. And I have a lovely group of four of us that we sort of came together and made a little writers group, which has been really helpful. And we meet once a month, and it's good. We sort of help ourselves stick to our goals that we set.
That is good. And
And
that's
just
important.
encourage each other. Yeah.
That is really
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining
Well,
me.
thank you. Thank you for reaching out. I always love to meet new people, and I'm just so distracted by our beautiful glasses. I mean, honestly, we couldn't be cooler.
We couldn't be cooler. I know. I know.
Right.